OTB's The Hurling Pod with James Skehill and Paul Murphy.
Tá craobhna here in an Ashangalyam. People of Galway, we love you.
I don't want to leave the people of Waterford down, because they're my life, People of Waterford are my life, and I love me county,
We love John Malone.
It's almost like they're afraid to kind of go and hurl and just let themselves express themselves. It's like as if they're nearly afraid to make a mistake, and sometimes you have to make a mistake and just throw off that bit of nervousness and have a go.
Yeah, it's pure constipated hurling.
Welcome along to episode 3 of the Hurling Pod. Plenty to discuss over the next hour with Paul Murphy and with James Skehill. Coming up on today's show, Waterford enjoy their biggest margin of victory against Tipperary in almost 50 years. They've stayed on top of Division 1B and are almost certainly on course now for the semi-finals. Kilkenny got their bid back on track to qualify for the last 4, with what proves to be a fairly comfortable win away to Dublin at Parnell Park. Laois delivered yet again against Antrim. They've preserved their top flight status for next season. Cork and Wexford have qualified for the semi-finals from 1A. They'll play each other in the last round, but it doesn't matter about that result. They've both already qualified. And Limerick's wait for a first win of the campaign goes on following a draw with their neighbours Clare. James Skehill, Paul Murphy with me. Gentlemen, how are you getting on?
Great, Will. How are you?
Very good now, Will. How are things?
Paul, could you have ever imagined that we'd be talking about Limerick needing to avoid defeat in their last league game to make sure they don't go into a relegation playoff? Like, I saw some of the commenters last week on YouTube were pointing out, don't worry, lads, when April comes around, they'll be fine. Kieran32 on YouTube last week, different Limerick come April. But we said this in February when they'd lost a couple of games. We're now in March, and Limerick have not won in their first 4 fixtures, Paul.
Yeah, like I think when we're talking about Limerick, we'll all admit, and I think this is across the board, any pundit will admit that you do believe that they're going to come somewhere right in championship. But I think just what people are looking at now at the moment is they're saying, well, okay, you lose 1 match, you lose 2 matches, but you go 3 matches, losing, you're getting lads sent off. Ennis is not an easy place to go, but you go up to Ennis, you draw, and then suddenly, you're in the position that you're in. I think we just expected Limerick to maybe make an easier stab at it or something. I don't know, but we're kind of seeing a few more, I suppose, not problems maybe, but certainly questions that have to be answered for Limerick before a championship. So, look, no one's saying that Limerick are on the downward here or anything like that. We do expect them to come good for championship, but there still is, I suppose, what's showing up now is there a few questions over them? One of the big things I would be thinking, and we talked about it last week, was if they lose 1 or 2 big players. And when we're talking big players, it's like players they can't replace. Well, how do they function? What way do they function? We saw in the semi-final, or we saw last week, should I say, that, they had to bring on 4 players at halftime, 4 really big, influential players. And then, against Clare there, we just saw that Declan Hannon going off, Keane Lynch going off. Okay, it doesn't look like it's anything serious. But it does raise a question that if they do go off, is there anyone to fill those key roles, and like the Diarmuid Burns roles and these things? I think there's a few lads there that they can't replace. So this is just what people, I think, are talking about at the moment. Again, nobody's writing Limerick off, but we're just, I suppose, trying to figure out what's happening in Limerick that they are in this position, because I think we all thought that they might lose 1 match and turn it on for the following week, but we're just seeing that that's not the case.
Yeah, like James, you said last week, we're not looking at a Limerick championship team just yet, and we have to wait and see where they're at when Easter weekend comes around with the starting 15. But the team that was named last week, when the team sheet came out on Friday, you're seeing half the team has been changed, and a lot of those frontline players were coming back in for the game against Clare. They seem to be really targeting getting that win on Sunday, but it didn't happen.
Yeah, it's all well and good saying that the league doesn't hold that much importance in comparison to the championship. That's obvious, but you don't just flick a switch. I'd always be a big advocate that you have to train the way you want to play, and you have to then when you come into the league, you have to nearly go in the ascendancy. Every day you go out has to be some sort of level of improvement. You know what I mean? So from day 1 to day 5 will be a gradual, better, 5% better today, 5% better tomorrow, and so on. And you roll into the championship. Right now, it looks like Limerick are just flatlining across, and they're chopping and changing formations, chopping and changing personnel, bringing in their bigger players, and they're getting the very same result, And I think yesterday showed Clare had a fantastic blueprint. Now, albeit the size of Innes pitch has had a lot to play with this too, but Clare's blueprint on how to attack Limerick, especially on the puck out, was something that definitely all the Munster teams would take going forward. And I think from Limerick will, the biggest part of their game is shutting you down in your puck out, turning you over, creating scores, and then creating scores after their own puck out. So if you can somehow neutralise that, or even turn it into your favour 60-40, you'll go a long way to definitely put Limerick on the back foot.
James, when it comes to that blueprint, probably over the last couple of years, and this is understandable given that Limerick have been the standard bearers, but so many teams appear to be coming up with a game plan which is good at trying to stop Limerick's style of hurling. It's almost some teams are trying to maybe transition their own game to be able to play against them, but it's very clear that teams are now tactically going after Limerick this season.
Yeah, they are. And like, I have to mention NFL again. Like, if you ever get, there's a quarterback, right, for the Baltimore Ravens, Lamar Jackson's name, right? When he first came on the scene, no team had a clue what to do with him because he was elusive, he was fast. So he was kind of what teams wouldn't have seen from a quarterback, right? Now Limerick are in year 4 or 5. When they first came on the scene over the first couple of years, teams are looking at them and saying, how are we going to get around them? And you've got a whole host of intelligent people in counties like Cork, Tip, Kilkenny, Galway, who are actively plotting how to get around Limerick. And you're slowly seeing that come around again now. I don't think, public opinion, let's say go back 2 months ago, would have been that Limerick were probably 30-40% better than everybody else. I don't think Limerick are as good as what the public have said at the moment. Now, at the end of last year's Ireland final, I had them well ahead of the pack, you know what I mean? But they seem to have come back a bit and the gap seems to close. But it's still, if you log on to any bookmakers right now, you'll see Limerick as the clear outright favourites. But definitely the blueprint for taking on Limerick, I won't say taking them down, but taking them on is there. And I think teams, as the season goes on, will try to develop that gradually.
Yeah, like Paul, there's all these kind of nuances when it comes to the argument around Limerick. And again, another couple of yellows which turned into a red last weekend has become a familiar story. Players have been injured, players have been getting tried out. And this is not the full Limerick machine, which we saw dispatch Waterford and Cork, particularly in an All-Ireland semi-final and final last year. But still, it has to give teams around them confidence that Cork, Galway, Wexford have been able to restrict Limerick's style of play. They're still the lowest scorers in Division 1A or Division 1B at this stage, which I never thought, whatever about discussion around relegation, I never thought we'd be discussing Limerick being the lowest scorers in the top flight.
No, I think we expected people, we were hoping teams to maybe take a scalp off Limerick in the league. And I think that's the best anyone was really expecting because, seeing them in the All-Ireland final last year, you were just saying, there's so many questions for teams to answer here before you have a chance to take a scalp off Limerick. But like what James is saying there, I think they're flatlining a small bit. Seamus Flanagan did an interview a few years ago, and he stated that Limerick work harder than everyone else, and that's why. And I agree with him. Like, they do work harder, and they're so intense in how they play. And even I saw Tom Condon over the weekend. He was saying that Paul Kinnerk, when he's training them, he believes that they train at 120%, so that, whatever that is, so that when it comes to a match, you've actually trained harder. And, I know a lot of coaches would believe that. But at the moment, that doesn't seem to be what's happening. I mean, they're being outworked, and that's the bottom line. And if they're priding themselves on the work rate, the one thing, and I think it's one thing that John Kiley will be looking for, kind of going, okay, lads, I don't mind if there's lads hitting wides here. I don't mind, any of those things, or lads making the odd mistake. But being outworked is an attitude. That's if you're being outworked, it's not because things didn't go your way. You can always run hard for a ball. You can always put in and tackle. You can always track back. You can always support. Okay, if you don't raise a ball or you don't put a ball over the bar, that comes down to the skill, and that's not an attitude problem. That's just maybe even confidence, whatever. But they're being outworked. I saw several instances as well where players were being isolated, which is not a thing we associate with Limerick. A player would get a ball out, Colin Coughlin be out on the wing, he gets a ball into the hand, hit by 3 Clare players, and then he can't get a pass away because there's no one necessarily there supporting. That's something we've seen, and I think it's something teams are looking at now. Probably the 2 things teams are bringing to the Limerick when they're playing Limerick is, one, hit them before they get their heads up. So if they get a ball into their hand, there has to be lads hitting them. And then the second one then is, as we've seen with Aaron Gillan, get under their skin, poke at them, whatever. And we do see even players, I suppose, players getting the dig, and another fellow wouldn't go down, but some players are going down highlighting it to referee. And that's what's, to me, that's saying that, the plan is there to get under Limerick's skin. Limerick are buying it. So every team is going to just keep doing it. And if you have to sell it to the referee a little bit, as teams are kind of doing, they're doing it. But they're, for me, the 2 things that we're seeing with Limerick at the moment. They're being a little bit outworked, and teams are getting under their skin. So it's just, they have to look at that and see how they're going to address it.
On that point about aggravation, James, every week that there's a discussion about a Limerick hit or a Limerick red card, this keeps it in focus, doesn't it, as we get closer to championship, that there's actually an incentive now, if you're an opposition player, to have a go at a Garrod Hegarty or have a go at an Aaron Gillan and try and take out one of their main players by getting them sent off, because it's been successful so far. Like, if you think about the Hegarty red card going right back to the Galway game, that was about trying to just poke him, get in his face and see if he'll react.
Yeah, like, I would have no problem in admitting that if I'm a coach of a team, I am assessing every single avenue to get a Limerick man off his game. Every avenue. I'm not saying I wouldn't condone hitting him, off the ball. Definitely not that. But I'm saying I'm in his ear. I'm talking about his life, his girlfriend, everything I can think of. I'm trying to get him down. Do you know what I mean? And we're not privy to conversations. We're not privy to off the ball stuff where probably clear he's holding Aaron Glenn all day. Do you know what I mean? Probably grabbing his hurl all day, stepping on his feet, pulling at the straps of his helmet all day. And what we see then probably with the wild swing from Glenn is just a culmination of all these incidents. But if you're a coach, you're saying get at them, get in their face, get up front, because it's shown. It's not me and Paul just talking about our opinions here. It's shown that it's proven. They just don't like it. They don't like it because yes, they're top dogs. They're the best team in the championship for the last number of years. They've out-muscled everyone for the last 3 years. So when someone muscles them and begins to out-muscle them, like Paul is saying, it just turns the tide in the opposite direction. You know what I mean? And they don't like it. So if I'm Kieran Kingston, I'm looking down and I'm saying Cork, or if I'm Brian Lohan again, I'm saying hit them straight in the mouth from the second you get the ball is thrown in and to see where it takes you. Because right now, Hegarty served a suspension. As of yesterday, Flanagan served a suspension, and all it is doing is having an ill effect on the team. The whole balance seems to have shifted. Hegarty came back yesterday, and truth be told, he looked very, very, he wasn't sharp at all. A lot of pickups were missed, and I think he was taken off, for a finish, So he wasn't as sharp as he would be because he wasn't going to continue the game. So like you said, Will, attack every avenue, and I won't say in 2 weeks' time we'll be talking about another red card, but there's always a possibility.
Look, this is why I'm delighted that we got two people on this pod who were there to stop people from putting scores in against them, because now I can ask both of you about the dark arts of defending, because you've just brought it up, James. Paul, did you ever try and wind up forward in the same fashion where you talk about rumours about his girlfriend or his personal life or anything like that? Because James has definitely shouted it from the goals by the sounds of it.
No, I can certainly say I didn't. It wasn't something that was that was part of my art. Different players play different ways. My thing would have been that when I was off the pitch, that I was training hard and so on. So that when I came to the pitch, I was thinking to myself, "There's no way this lad could have trained harder than me," and that's what got me mentally prepared. And for me, when there was a lad who would have came on to me, and it happens less than you think, but it still does happen, I suppose. But I would have had lads kind of, I suppose, sledging or whatever you want to call it, coming in and mouthing at me. And the one thing I would have had myself prepared for in terms of saying would have been that if he's mouthing at me, that's because he thinks I'm a danger to him having a good game. So he decided now that he has to come on, he has to mouth at me because he doesn't actually think he can beat me 50-50. So that I would always go, if he's come on, he's mouthing. I said, brilliant, there's a weakness in this fella. He doesn't think he can just go out there and ruin the position. And in saying that now, James, I won of Mark Joe Canning, Mark Seamus Callan. Them boys aren't sledging. And maybe they'd be going out looking at, or maybe other players would be going out targeting a lad. Let's say if you thought Paul Murphy would react, maybe you would then. But the likes of those lads wouldn't go out sledging because they're there to hurl. They believe they can hurl.
That's my point, Paul. That's my point, you see. Yeah. What I'm saying is, as of now, right now, if I'm a coach looking at Limerick and I'm looking at Flanagan, looking at Glenn, I'm getting on them. I'm getting on them because they will draw a strike. You know what I mean? It's proven. Yeah. It's not just us thinking maybe they will. It's absolutely proven. It's in the pudding in the last couple of weeks that Hegarty will strike if you get in his face. And get in his face. There's nothing wrong with that in the game. Get in him. So if a tackle's coming, hit him. You know what I mean? Get up front and use the body. Sledging is a different story. That's for football. Do you know what I mean? And there is two things there that I was saying. I was saying that if a lad's trying to put you off, if he's trying to put you off by mouthing at you, you're playing into his hands by actually doing what he wants you to do, is by actually giving him a dig back. And I suppose to say a game that you would have played in as well. I won't mention the player that was involved, but we had Ger Elwood would be a fiery corner forward. Lads didn't like marking him in training because he'd give it back to you fairly hard. Now, if you gave him any sort of a dig, he'd give it back to you twice as hard. But we played G a few years ago, and look, the blood was up in the match at some stage, and Ger, maybe he dropped the ball or something, and whoever was marking him, I won't say it was marking him, came out with the ball, handed it off, it went up the other end, and he got a point. And the lad went into him and said, "That was your fault. You dropped the ball there. That's your score. You put it over the bar." Ger turned around and got the next ball, pushed your man over and stuck it over the bar. And he said, "Who got that score?" basically. And that's what you're looking for, I would say, out of players. The likes of Jerry Elwood would be a fiery man, but you're looking for him to react on the board, not react in terms of a dig, not react in terms of going a man down. And you know what I mean? That's exactly, if he in that situation hit a dig, that's what the Galway defender wanted. Don't do it. You're doing him a favour by doing it. Exactly.
So, Paul, were Callanan and Canning, two you've named there, the kind of difficult players to mark and two of the best forwards of recent years, Are they silent when you're marking them then, and they just kind of drift around, or is there much of a conversation that actually happens when you're detailed to mark them?
There's no conversation. I could name. I'm trying to even think of the lads that would mouth when you're actually marking them, and it's very few. The likes of Canning or Seamus Callan, to be honest, they're like, we would have talked to like Joe when he retired and different lads and saying how much of us, a great figure he was for the sport. But the likes of these lads, the reason they are in such a position and they are great players is because of their attitude as well. They just, I don't know. My reading of it is that they just don't believe in doing it because they believe they're great players and they don't need to mouth at a fella. Maybe they've done it, or maybe they've had their own individual battles. But anytime I've marked them, there's never been a case of, we've said anything to each other to get each other off. You might fight for a ball and you hit each other digs and different things, fighting for the ball. That's all manly stuff. That's not going out, or no one loses any respect for each other doing that. So you just kind of get on with it. You're fighting for a ball and that's it, and you're fighting your position and you're shouting at your own players and these things. But there was never a case of directly targeting each other. And I can think of very few players that actually that would have happened over the years. So, but maybe it's something at the moment that each team is looking for their own angle, and maybe it's happening a little bit more than we know or than what we see.
There you go, James. If you were to take over from Brian Cody at some point as Kilkenny manager, you could inject a different type of coaching style into them then.
I don't think they need coaching down there, to be honest. I think they've won enough. They've won enough, to be honest. They won't take too much advice from a Galway man, I think.
The cleanest segue possible, which can bring us round to Kilkenny's great win against Dublin at the weekend. This is one of the most important fixtures because it's so important with the shake-up for the top four in Division 1B because teams have been beating each other so far. And I'll come to you first, James, to get the neutral perspective on it. Kilkenny ran riot, really, against Dublin at the weekend. I know Matty Kenny was saying on Off the Ball afterwards that he was kind of at a loss to how they performed so poorly when they played so well at Thurles the week before. How much is that down to maybe Dublin's deficiency, particularly as a forward line, or how much are we giving credit to the way that Kilkenny hurled in Parnell Park on Saturday night?
I'd have no problem admitting that I think historically the best working team ever, like best county for work would be Kilkenny. And I don't think the number on their back really matters, like where they can put in a block. You'd often see Walsh, or even TJ back on their 145 putting in, a hook, a block or a tackle. And I think that seems to be synonymous with the whole team. You know what I mean? So that middle third where you've got half forwards, midfield, halfbacks, all those guys are just making that place a battleground inside. I was so impressed with the work rate. I messaged Paul saying about Alan Murphy, and by my count, he had 4 turnovers now. It might necessarily be him turning over the ball and picking it up himself, but he was in with a chip or a tackle, and it resulted in scores the far side. And that just seems to be the, their MO for the whole team. And Dublin weren't impressive because systematically Kilkenny shut them down. So what we saw against Tipperary, whereby there was lovely balls being popped into the 13 corner by Dublin players with Ron Hayes running onto it, that didn't happen at all. That happened for the first probably 5-10 minutes in the first half, but after that then it got snuffed out. Paddy Deegan was excellent. I thought, Blanchfield in the half-back line, when he won that ball out over Danny Sutcliffe, that was a message, like don't put the ball down here again. You know what I mean? I thought he was fantastic. And just Kilkenny, it was probably Clare and Limerick was the most championship feel type game when you think of the pace and the strength both teams showed. This is probably the second one. And, Kilkenny, they were very, very impressive. Like they have, over the course of the league so far, like they have 17 different scorers. There were some of the guys who played there, on Saturday that I genuinely, hands up, I didn't know them. You know what I mean? And even when I'm going through the list of all their scores, going back over the record, there's 7-8 guys I don't know. Like, do you know what I mean? It's my own issue, right? But it just seems to be they're a very kind of neutral, level bunch whereby there's no standout star. Really, really, obviously Walter Walsh had a great game, but like where you'd see a team who's going really well, there's some guy really standing out and the rest of the team behind him. It's a real collective effort, and they're going well.
Yeah.
They're going well.
I think the plus point, if you were a Kilkenny fan, would be that TJ Reid's going to come back perfectly rested after his honeymoon and having maybe put the Ballyhale disappointment behind him. And he's the star player you can inject into these young players who are getting a chance at the moment. Because 17 scores, I think they said on RT2 after the game at the weekend, they now have in the league so far this year, Paul, I think it's 10 or 11 different scorers from play. Like, these players are coming in, and we spoke about taking opportunity, particularly Blanchfield, who James has already mentioned. I watched him once or twice now on the telly this year. I think he's looked really, really good, and he's a player who's probably emerging ahead of championship this year for Kilkenny.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he just grew into the match. He wouldn't have been far off man of the match. I know Hughie Lawler was given the man of the match, but Blanchfield was excellent. But it's, it goes back to even something we were saying about there, about Limerick and work rate. I can tell you what Brian Cody wants to see in a player, regardless what, you might look at player and say, this fella's skillful, or this fella is a tough hurler, this fella has great fitness. One thing Brian looks across the board for is the likes of the hooking and blocking and tackling. That's what he wants. So, like, if you want to play in the team, it doesn't matter if you're a great player when you're off the, like, let's say you move out of trouble and you take a ball and you'll always put it over the bar, you're a great free taker. You're not going to be on the pitch unless you work hard, unless you hook and block. The first half there, David Blanchfield, what I just thought really set the tone for it was a ball came across, Dublin sprayed the ball across, and corner forward got it for Dublin. And David Blanchfield came sprinting back. It wasn't his man, and he just got a bit of a hook. The ball squirted in towards the 21. Ball popped back to a Dublin man again. Blanchfield was back in again, he blocked, and Kilkenny turned the ball over. And, like, that's what Brian is looking for in terms of the players, in terms of the team. Again, it goes back to, you might rack up a big score, but we used to often put up the hooks and blocks on the board after training, and that was the indicator of how you actually went in a match. Some days you might only get 10 in the whole game. In other games you could have went really well and you might have got 20 and a half. So that's what Brian would be looking for. And the likes of Blanchfield there, I think he had just really epitomised it, and the confidence of him as well. Like, he's out there on the wing, young player coming into it. Hurled a great game on Danny Sutcliffe, and then I think he popped over 2 or 3 points as well in the making. And the last ball was very significant. He got the head up, had a look around, showed a bit of calmness, said, right, none of you are looking for the ball, I'm putting it over the bar. So, the likes of Blanchfield, he just epitomised what they're about, and I was really impressed with him over the weekend. Massively impressed.
How old school or not is Brian Cody around stats and so on, Paul? Because I listened to Tommy Walsh when he was on with the lads on OTBM last week, and they were talking about GPS, and he was kind of half joking about the fact that you can see with your eyes probably much better you can see in the GPS, that sometimes running is mindless running if you've got good positioning. And he used the point that I think he was hurling with Leinster at one point with Brian Whelan, and Brian Whelan had made the point that it's like, why not just be in the right place to get the ball rather than making meaningless moves which actually don't benefit you? Was Cody big on stats? If you're saying that he's thrown up a sheet and looking at hooks and blocks and so on, how much does Brian look into that as a coach?
Yeah, I'd certainly say other teams probably have far more in-depth. And we have great analysis, and certainly at the end of my time at Kilkenny, we had any analysis we wanted, it was there for us, and would have been broken down into, rooks, one, blocks, all these sort of things. But I always just say that other teams were probably that much further ahead of us, maybe in terms of going into real in-depth stuff. I think Brian just likes to keep it a bit plainer. Like, you can sometimes go into the weeds too much on what's important and what's not important. But the hooks and blocks was always one thing continuously throughout the career that was always there, even before, I suppose, stats as a whole. Like, before we had GPSs or anything, Brian always looked for hooks and blocks. What are you doing hooking and blocking? I remember it was 2014, I think it was the replay. The only thing he said afterwards, I think maybe it would have been 2015, was that we got 46 or 47 hooks and blocks in the game, and it was a record for an All-Ireland final. And that was something he went, that's what I'm looking for. It wasn't a case of how many goals you got in the game, who got possessions, because they can be deceiving as well. Possessions can be deceiving. Running up 13 kilometres on a GPS can be deceiving, because you could have a fella running around like a Mixie Rabbit and he's racking up kilometres, but what kind of kilometres are they? They're pointless kilometres. Is he supporting the man in possession? Is he making a run, up the pitch to get a hook or a block? So if you run less kilometres than another fella, but that's what you're doing, that's what Brian is looking for. So he would have used the stats, but he also would have been very, I suppose, clever about reading into what did the stats actually mean, because, Brian would often tell lads, listen, you have all the legs in the world, but where were you here? Where were you here? Those sort of things. So in fairness to him, like, I know lads like to think that we don't look at it in Kilkenny or that we don't do these things, but in fairness, Brian would have been with it, and it's information at the end of the day. It's information that's on the pitch, that's happening live on the pitch. So he knew what he wanted to look for, and he knew what also made sense to him in terms of telling us going out the pitch what he wanted us to do. And those were the stats that Brian would have always taken.
Well, James, no matter how Kilkenny are analysing how they've been playing so far, there's no way that Paul can hide any more from the fact that this idea that Kilkenny are building slowly. And you said last week they're almost a bit too quiet so far. At this stage now, Kilkenny have won 3 out of 4. They go on and play against Waterford in the last game, got a chance to win that and be guaranteed of a place in the semi-final. Mm-hmm. It might have been a kind of a slow start, but Kilkenny have shown that there's a bit of strength and depth and that they're actually looking pretty decent this year.
Yeah, I think I like, if Brian Cody's probably assessing the league campaign so far, he'd probably look at what we're talking about, the scores and the method in which they've won their games. And I think he'd be quite content that he's blooded some new guys with more guys to come back, So that in itself is probably a success from a Kilkenny perspective. And they've gone about it quite well. there's no real headlines around hammering certain teams that are getting hammered themselves, or red cards, or off the ball stuff, or crazy interviews. It's just normal run-of-the-mill stuff, plodding along as they go, and like that's impressive in itself. You know what I mean? And it's in terms of championship, like they'll get a good game now in Nolan Park against Waterford. Again, we know going down there, a very proud home crowd. So regardless of where the standing is in the league, Kilkenny are going to want to win that game. So I'm not sure what kind of team he'll throw out. Maybe, probably a closer to the first 10 or 11 or 12 players again, let's say, trying to probably stem what Waterford are doing at the moment, which is quite impressive in itself, and try to finish the league rounded off well by getting to the semi-final. I'd say, of course, he wants to win the league. I'd imagine Brian Cody wants to win the league, and so Kilkenny. But I don't think it's all that important, if you know what I mean. I think preparation for championship trumps everything when it comes to that, because come the end of July, no one is going to give a rat's about who won the league. It's going to be, where did you finish in your tier in the championship, and that's what he's looking at. And I think the preparation so far has been very impressive.
Do you know what, James? When we're one round of the league still to go of the regular section before the knockout, so a lot of these teams won't play again until the Easter weekend when the championship gets underway. It's very difficult. And we 2 or 3 people who were in the comments in the YouTube last week asking about the composition of the Leinster Championship, where we think it's at. Like, even with another round of games since then, I think it's very difficult to tell, because Wexford have been very impressive. Galway have had a couple of defeats against strong teams, but have played generally quite well so far. Kilkenny have beaten the teams that they were expected to beat and had a close game against Tipperary. We're not quite sure, how it all fits in when the Ballyhale players come back into the starting 15. To me, on the face of it, like Kilkenny going for 3 in a row this year in Leinster, but it's actually very difficult to call how this round robin is actually going to go at the top.
God, it's extremely difficult. And I know for myself from playing the round robin, there's so many tangibles involved in this. Like, it's not just a simple knockout whereby, you might have 2 or 3 games in this championship. Like, you've got 5-6 games in the championship, and so many things come into play. So where you're home, where you're away, who you're playing in such home and away games, what injuries you pick up because the games are coming so thick and fast, the conditions, whether if that's wind or rain in a certain stadium, like all this comes into play. So like, there's no team at the moment, like respectfully, when you have Galway, Kilkenny, Wexford, Dublin, none of them have put their head above the parapet by a mile, because you can't really point to one county and say they're clear hot favourites. It's only marginal. So like, if I was to call the Leinster Championship right now, I can't actually put a degree of separation between any team, because so much comes into play. And it's great for the neutral. It's mighty for the neutral that they're going to get to witness this spectacle of games week in, week out. But like, no one is really kind of, I suppose, odds on, I suppose, if you want to put it that way. And I think everyone, if you're in a Wexford dressing room or a Dublin dressing room or any dressing room, that you're saying we have a chance to win this here. We have a chance. Yeah,
because Paul, last weekend, Dublin, everyone was talking about how well they were going. They had retargeted the Walsh Cup, got that piece of early pre-season silverware, had carried that form through the league. Up until last week, we're unbeaten. We've seen how good Waterford have been. I got a draw at home to them. They beat Kilkenny. We're probably talking about Dublin maybe being on form, the best team in Leinster. But it kind of has us back scratching our heads again about where Dublin are actually at, because the fear would be that when Dublin have looked good a few times in recent years, and I even think of their Leinster run last year, was followed up by a very tame performance against Cork and Thurles when it went to the qualifiers. So what's the real Dublin here?
Yeah, it's a hard one to call. Like, we were thinking we were seeing a different Dublin and we were praising them the last few weeks. But, the one thing we did say against Tipperary was that, Tipperary didn't hurl clever against Dublin. They fed the ball into Paddy Smith. Paddy Smith came busting out, and that really gave Dublin the launching pad to beat Tipperary. The one thing I would be saying after that then is, okay, use it for Matty Kenny and lads. Use that as a positive. Look, lads, this is the way we can hurl. We can beat Tipperary or any of these teams when you hurl well. But I'd also say with it, lads, at the same time, Tipperary gave us the ball we wanted us to give them. If they came with something different, would we have reacted as well? If you look at Kilkenny over the weekend, where was Paddy Smith? They were playing around him. They weren't allowing him to do that. And for me, that's like, Dublin kind of went, hang on for a second, Kilkenny aren't playing on our terms here now. And they just dropped the heads. If they got, I was looking at the Tipperary Waterford match, and, Tipperary started really well and put over a good few points, and they were 7 points to 2 up after about 8 minutes or 10 minutes. Dublin could have been the exact same against Kilkenny, except they hit 3 or 4 wide on the left-hand side. And they kind of just left Kilkenny hanging in it. Kilkenny found their feet after that. Paddy Deegan was dropping back. They started cutting out the ball. And if you even see the ball Paddy Deegan gave to Cian Kenny for Cian Kenny's points, just kind of epitomised what they were doing. Paddy Deegan got the head up, saw there was a little pocket of space, and gave that little really good ball into Cian Kenny, as opposed to what Tipperary were doing with Dublin, bombing it into the D, hoping for the best, that Jake Morris would come out with it or whatever. So when Kilkenny didn't give Dublin the ball they wanted, suddenly Dublin were going, how do we correct this? How do we row in on this and get them playing the way we want to play them? And then more to the point then, once Dublin started getting the ball, Kilkenny were just hitting them again. And if you see, there was 3 matches where I really thought it happened. Clare did it against Limerick. When Limerick got the ball, Clare hit them. But Waterford yesterday against Tipperary man got the ball, he hit them really hard. So that's what Kilkenny were doing against Dublin. For me, it was those 2 things. Using the ball really well, avoiding Paddy Smith. And then once Dublin got the ball, they just choked them. And something significant for me then as well was Dublin didn't score between the 8th minute and 27th minute. And it was Donald Burke each time they scored. That's straight away there, you're saying, look, that's not good enough. You know, when you saw like Ronan Hayes the week before winning loads of ball, I think he came away with 1-3. Where are these lads now? You know, when you need them, when you need someone to get up and let's say after 10 minutes, say, lads, get a score on the board. It wasn't happening from Dublin. So as much as we're praising the last few weeks, maybe it could be a bit hard to say they started believing their own hype a small bit, and Kilkenny just came up and said, we're going to go at you here. But again, it's still the question of Dublin is you can do it when you want to do it. But is the attitude there to go out and do it every week? And okay, you have a great win, but back it up the following week, because again, Galway last year, they had a great victory. But then they just didn't turn it on again. Like, you know, they just went back into the reverted to type. So this is the question we're asking about Dublin now at the moment is, we know they're capable, but do they have a plan B? They have a plan A, but do they have a plan B? And when a team is putting it up to them, are they capable of reversing it, or did they just do what they did against Kilkenny and drop the heads and just leave the game, wait for the referee to blow the whistle and just leave Parnell Park?
Just to round off on that game, Paul, because you can give us a Kilkenny perspective on this, you'd have to be happy if you're from Kilkenny with the clinical side which was shown by them in the second half. Like the Walsh and Kyogan goals came at good times. They worked those goal chances and pretty much effectively killed the game at that point, and then didn't really let up afterwards. Like, that has to be a good sign coming out of Kilkenny from the game at the weekend.
Yeah, absolutely. It was exactly what you're looking for. You know, they went up, they didn't, I suppose, hang around to see what Dublin were going to do. Dublin got off to a good start, but, you know, once Kilkenny took the lead, they just put the foot in the gas. And that's something that we're looking for. Maybe, like, you know, when teams are trying to find their feet and figure out their team and so on, that can be something that teams can be criticised for. You go ahead by 4 or 5 points, but you let the other team back into it. But Kilkenny just put the foot down. The likes of Walter Welch, quite in the first half, was, you know, fighting hard and working hard, like we said. Even though he wasn't getting the ball, he was still working hard. But then in the second half, he just exploded into the game, and Dublin didn't know what to do with him. And then as lads were even being introduced off the bench, they were getting stuck in. You know, you had Mikey Carey driving forward, getting the score. You had plenty of lads just all over the pitch. So again, there's great positives. I mean, I think any team over the weekend would have taken what Kilkenny got out of Parnell Park. You know, lots of lads getting on the scoring sheet, lots of positives. Players getting game time, you know, you were blooding lads, but at the same time, your experienced lads were stepping up, and you were just learning a bit more about yourself. They were great in defence as well. You know, Hughie Lawler and Paddy Deegan were just up the spine or central. Pádraig Welsh at centre forward again. Like, you have the great dilemma now if TJ comes back, where do you want to put him? And that's what you want. You want to be able to put out a lineup with maybe TJ wing forward or corner forward or centre forward, whichever. So I think Kilkenny fans coming away from Parnell Park would have been really happy the weekend. And I know from chatting to people, it's just, you know, they're giving the team time, which is needed as well, but also the team are, I suppose, reciprocating that by actually putting in great performances. So it's, you know, it's great at the moment.
James, if we can stick with Division 1B, Waterford have endured a lot of misery in recent years against Tipperary, and Tipperary beating them heavily at times in their home ground in Walsh Park. This time round, Tipperary are very much in the game up until about 3/4 of the game gone. But Waterford showed, I thought, great physicality, great pace. Looks like they're incredibly well conditioned with the way they finished this game as well. Finished out incredibly strongly. They win by 10 points in the end, 128 to 21 points. Unbeaten at this stage, 7 points racked up from their 4 games so far. Yeah. How impressed have you been by Waterford thus far?
So I've been very impressed. I think they've a great mix to the game, a great blend. You couldn't really pinpoint one facet of the game and say that's how they're doing it. You couldn't say, oh, it's a speed game, it's a power game. They're kind of they've mixed it all. So they have a strength game where they can hit you hard as Paul was saying. They've got a power and pace game where they're hitting you on breaks, and you know they're like there's 6 and 7 guys running at you when they're going forward. That was evident even at the start of last year, and you know they tried to implement it, and it's like they've improved on it now. So if you look at any turnover yesterday, when they really hit, as Paul said, they hit Tipperary guys hard, or they hit Tip guys hard, and as soon as the turnover starts, they're all facing the one direction, attacking, giving options. And I can tell you as a defender, and Paul tell you this, when you see 4 or 5 or 6 guys coming at you unmarked, because you can't, unstructured and unmarked, you know, it's a sight. It's a sight in itself, and you're thinking, how are we going to stop this in a split second? How are we going to stop this? I can tell you, it's very, very difficult to do. You can have all the systems in place and all the tactics, but if you have a team who just is operating at a level of freedom, whereby as soon as a turnover happens, they have the license to go forward, God, it's a great recipe. It's a recipe for disaster for the defensive team, but it's a great recipe for success for the offensive team. And they just seem, again, they have a good balance. And then they have Ty Duburka. Look at the condition of him. I haven't seen him. He fixed his helmet yesterday, and I looked at his arm, and I went, Jesus, he's in some nick. You know what I mean? For considering a guy who's come back off a serious injury, so he's an all-star, getting back an all-star, which is a great kind of, I suppose, rejuvenation for a team to get a guy of his caliber. And they just have a good, I suppose, they have a good thing going. You know what I mean? It's kind of hard to kind of explain or even put into to verbalize somewhat, because Cahill, go back a bit now, and he showed great confidence in the players. That when Cahill said he had ample opportunity to go over to Tipperary and kind of take the reins there and work with under-20s that he'd worked with in the past, which would have been probably 99%, including myself, of people would have said he's going to do that. He stuck with the players. He's been backed by the board, same management team. He's implemented some young guys, and they just seem to be all going the one direction. And it's a real positive front for Waterford.
Do you know what I like as well, James, is that there's versatility among that panel. Like in recent years, we've seen some of these Waterford players play in different positions. But even in the last couple of games, watching Jack Fagan, who was more of a kind of a primary possession winning forward, is now filling the gap for them at wing back and doing quite well in that position too.
Yeah, when he's number 5 in his back, and you would probably consider Jack beyond. I would consider Jack their primary ball winner in the air. So when you consider what he did to Kilkenny the year before last in the semi-final, he single-handedly got primary possession and gave us them on a plateau last year, or a platform last year. And even in I suppose in most of Munster last year and against Galway, he's very, very difficult to stop. So then you take your primary ball winner on the forwards and you put him back in the backs. It does scream of versatility, and it screams that obviously Liam Cahill has seen something in Jack that favours the team possibly more in the backs. Gives them a better balance, or gives them a better direction going forward. And when you have that kind of 5-6 guys, as we said, going forward and turnover, and if Jack coming from a wing back position, it's nearly like the whole Kyle Hayes thing. Kyle Hayes started his first All-Ireland at centre forward. He goes back to wing back. Big question mark. Same with Barry Nash. And now they're two of the best attacking defenders, if you want to put them in that bracket, in the country. And maybe Cahill is looking at this and saying, Jack Fagan can do the same thing for us. So again, they know what they're doing. They know what they're about. Very impressive.
Yeah, and this is where games might benefit them as well, Paul. They get a bit of extra time now to bring in some of these players who are coming back in, like the Mannies after Ballygunner's campaign, and Jamie Barron is coming back soon as well, who you would almost guess these guys are automatic starters, but the rest of the players who've been playing have been doing well in the league so far. And maybe this is the new position for Fagan and where he's going to play. Like you look at Bennett doing all the scoring in the forwards currently as well. It's not a bad problem to have all this versatility. And Waterford almost certainly going to get at least one game beyond the end of the league with a semi-final and maybe a final as well. Be no harm for them maybe to get a bit of extra hurling ahead of the championship itself.
Yeah, this is the thing. We're trying to bait at the moment really who wants to win the league. What positions are teams in? Do they want to bring it that close to the championship and different things? And, Waterford seem to be the team at the moment, and maybe Cork as well, that I don't think, it sounds funny to say it, that they're afraid of getting to a league final. I think there's some teams that are going, God, we could actually do with having a bit of a break before championship. There's a few things we need to get in order here. But, I was looking at Waterford the weekend, and I was just saying to myself, in terms of, look, we talk about Limerick are the favourites, and they are the favourites, and we're talking about Cork showing well, but in terms of a team in hurling at the moment that have the biggest panel to pick from and have the strongest panel, for me it's Waterford, because I was just looking at the subs that were sitting on the bench and that they were bringing on, and Austin Gleeson on the bench, like you said, Jamie Barron, Desi Hutchinson's come back. And the one thing I got was that all the talk yesterday, not to talk soccer on this, but as we're talking about Manchester United and the players they were bringing off the bench and lads sulking and so on, Roy Keane was giving out yesterday. When you see the lads coming off the bench with Waterford, not to say that other teams had lads sulking or anything like that, but the energy boys coming off the bench for Waterford and what they bring to the game, they're producing this 70-minute performance that teams would only dream of having, And I think it's because Liam Cahill has kind of harvested this environment where every player just feels valued down below, that there's a position for him. And we're talking about Jack Fagan, about him moving around Jack Fagan. I think, he's moving around Jack Fagan because Jack Fagan, he's capable of playing really any position. But I think Liam Cahill is kind of saying, Jesus, I have a good few lads competing for half forward here. I have lads competing for midfield. Maybe I could do Jack Fagan, like James was saying, being a type of Kyle Hayes at wing back and driving forward because he has the legs for it. And like that, if Tipperary want to drive balls down on top of wing back, Jack Fagan will win it. So Liam Cahill is kind of in a position, and again, I think it's the reward of Liam Cahill staying on. Okay, he has a project that we're calling it, that he wants to see this term out before going to Tipperary down the line at some stage. But there's no doubt, I suppose, Liam Cahill could have went to Tipperary, but by staying with Waterford and sticking to what he believes in, I think it's just galvanised the Waterford panel, that it's given them a confidence saying, I believe in every single one of you. I want to win an All-Ireland. I believe what's in here can win an All-Ireland. And I think so much of that just feeds into what they're doing. Like they just look like a team that's really enjoying what they're doing. They're a brilliant team to watch, and the energy, like you'd be tired watching Waterford at the moment. So like everything they're doing at the moment, it's hard to pick holes in anything bad or anything negative, or where they need to. You'd be very cynical, I think, really at this stage to pick it out, because they just seem to be in a really good place at the moment.
Yeah, and I wonder as well, James, what might be the benefit for Waterford getting their hands on a piece of silverware? Because like, no doubt Desi Hutchinson, Pádraig Manny, these lads come back in now after winning with Ballygunner. Finally, a Waterford team have got their hands on the Tommy Moore Cup with the All-Ireland club. They come back in now. The 2 COVID years, they've lost out to Limerick in All-Ireland final, All-Ireland semi-final, mean they haven't been able to end the wait for an All-Ireland. But if they were to win a league, or if they were to win a Munster Championship, with all the talent they have, there's no reason they can't be targeting both competitions. That could be a huge boost potentially before going into the knockout stages of the All-Ireland this year.
You know, being honest, this sounds a small bit dismissive of the championships, what they are, but for league and even the Munster, and I know the Munster Championship is sacred down there, so God forgive me for speaking into this, but yeah, I know, yeah. But I think Waterford, you know, truthfully speaking, they've graduated from that. You know, it's nearly like the Ballygunner attitude. I don't think they're looking that a league has put that aside. Munster Championship, it would be lovely to win it, don't get me wrong, and probably a fast route to Ireland, but they're really targeting Ireland. You know, I think all the pieces have lined up now, and like one time you look at Waterford and you say, right, they're a team of passion, as we used to call it, right? That if the crowd gets behind them, they're very difficult to stop. You know, that was nearly one of the only strings in their bow. And if you can stop that and keep the crowd quiet in Waterford, you'll stop Waterford. You know, but nowadays it's much different. They have a great balance of forward units. They have a great power game. They have a good management team, as we know, you know, and they just know what they're about. And I don't think when you put all them things together, especially if you're thinking about trying to contest for Ireland, but if you're trying to win in Ireland, you have to have all these things together. And I'm looking at Waterford and saying, geez, they're playing well. They're obviously preparing well because their condition is fantastic. They have a good tactical base. You know, structurally and systematically, they're impressive. They know what they're about, as I said to you. And when you piece all them together, you're saying, no, league's not enough. Munster Championship's not enough. It's Ireland or nothing. You know, and they're knocking on the door the last couple of years, and they've obviously been beaten by a super team. And like, it's certainly not like what the Mayo and Dublin complex they had in the football. You know, like everyone would say, Dublin is the best team ever. Mayo are useless, but Mayo were pushing the best team ever. And I'm thinking, but they never surpassed them. You know, so I'm looking at Waterford and I'm saying, right, they have now to get past Limerick and Ireland. And the only way they're going to do it is by winning that Ireland. That's the only way that team gets justification for their effort so far.
Well, Paul, it almost felt like an All-Ireland success for Laois with the circumstances yesterday too, as we finish out the fixtures in 1B from this weekend, because this was the important game for them. Everything is forgotten about when they went down to Walsh Park and conceded 7 goals, finishing a little bit tamely against Kilkenny the week before when we were talking about the Laois Antrim game. And everything for me ahead of that game pointed to Antrim's form being really good. They were going to go in, raid Portlaoise, win, and Antrim would be assured of a place in Division 1 for next year. Not how it played out. And that was even with Laois having to hurl for long stages yesterday afternoon with 14 men after Jack Kelly was sent off. But Laois went up at one stage 6 points up. Antrim came back. The game was very much in the balance. Everyone was a bit nervy because the TV scoreline was wrong for about 5 minutes. So a lot of people were thinking, whoa, Laois aren't actually ahead. This game is level. And then Charlie Dwyer, Paul, puts over one of the most remarkable winning scores you'll ever see, where I think anyone on the Laois team, if it wasn't for Charlie Dwyer's talent, would have been saying, pass the ball, do not take what's at best a 20-80 shot over your shoulder on your weaker side. But yet he split the post in Moore Park and they get out with what's a very, very important win. And funnily enough, Laois have just got Antrim's number. That's 3 years in a row. They've met a couple of times in different championships in the league, and Laois are able to win pretty much every time that they meet.
Yeah, we talked about it last week, saying we were wondering where Cheddar was going to pull it out of, because it looked like that he had to pull kind of a rabbit out of a hat because their form just wasn't good going into it. And that's no disrespect to Laois, but you know, I think they tell you that themselves, that you know, they were failing to get any sort of traction in matches, and you know, to get from there to going and beating a really good Antrim side. And Antrim have just been pipped at the post so many times so far this year that really you'd be saying that this is pointing in the way of an Antrim win. And if you told everyone before the match that Laois will have a lad sent off after 25 minutes or so and they'll still go on to win, you wouldn't believe it, because this was a performance we hadn't seen from Laois. Again, look, we've talked about Laois. So many of the players that are there have been involved when they had the great championship run a few years ago in 2019. So they do have the players there. But like you said, this was a performance that just seemed to come out of the blue altogether. Like Paddy Purcell's goal at the start, which just set the tone for everything. He just, from the sideline, came racing in and hung it up. There just was no doubt in their mind, and they were getting scores that they hadn't been getting all year. They were putting ones over from the sideline. Like you said, Dwyer, he had a brilliant game, and he just seemed really up for it as well. Any time they got a score and they cut back to him, usually you'd have a player jogging back into position. He was leaping around the pitch, and not in a bad way. He was just really up for it. But the last score, like you said, the score of the weekend, kind of one of those ones you'd give out to a fella if he did it after 5 minutes in a match, that he didn't look, he just swung and threw it over. Never mind trying to be the winning score in a match. It's just not what we know at the moment in hurling, but using the ball well and give the ball to the man in the best position and all this crack. But sometimes you need just the inspirational thing of a fella getting the ball, taking charge and putting it over. And look, Dwyer is a brilliant player. He's not too far away. We would love to have him at this side of the border. He's not too far away from the Kilkenny border. So we would love to have him. We take anyone. But Dwyer is an excellent hurler. And yesterday, look, I think in fairness, look, it's not to, I suppose, big it up to a huge thing. Look, there was nothing overly at stake. There was no trophy on the line or anything. But certainly for like Dwyer, put in a really defined performance like that on the Laois players yesterday when they really needed it. I think they'll take some solace from that. And it was just, I suppose, something that I think that the Laois crowd really needed it after the performances this year. But look, full credit to Laois to deserving the victory.
Yeah, the thing is, James, and we were chatting at the weekend, the three of us, about Malachy Clerkin's article in the Irish Times, where he pointed out, and I think there's very good arguments in there about some of the deficiencies about the National Hurling League, and particularly since it's been restructured, are almost certain that one team from, say, the pack outside the top 8 are going to take some ritual beatings, and it was Westmeath last year, Offaly this year. You're likely to have two teams that are going to be competitive with each other in 1B. So this fixture is going to be important most years, because it's almost certainly going to decide who's staying up and who's going down. It's kind of forgotten sometimes that now Laois have been 11 years in Division One of the Hurling League. A lot of those years they've had to stay up with the skin of their teeth. They've won some relegation playoffs along the way. But for all the disappointment there would have been in Laois about the way they hurled in the first 3 games, 2023 they're going to be a Division One hurling team again.
Yeah, and that article, I think what everyone does is they draw comparisons to the Football League setup. And every county, bar one, plays football, let's say, and they're in a certain division of their own merit, you could say. So it's not as if a couple of counties are being isolated. So if you think of it at the minute in the hurling, we've got a 12-team top tier league, let's call it that, right? And there's probably 2 or 3 teams that struggle to challenge the top 9, but you can't isolate them. So we tried the 1B league a few years ago, and even now we're down it ourselves, you know what I mean? And it was no good for the top teams, and it was no good for the smaller teams, because it really came down to one fixture. And I remember we played, was it Limerick one year, and that was to qualify for the league above, and it was that was our fixture. So every other game that we were playing at that time was aimed at probably blooding members of the squad, you know what I mean? Or maybe just getting some matches, getting some minutes into guys who come back from injuries, everything was centered on one fixture. And that's not fair on the top teams either, you know what I mean? But I'm obviously have the interest of growing the game and growing the game in the counties that are trying to grow the game. So if you look at as we said, the Antrim, the Laois, the Offaly's at the moment, whether they like it or not, they're still trying to get some traction in the game, where they were historically brilliant, but now they're at the back of the pack at the moment, So it's there's no easy fix, Will. We could stay here and debate this all day, and we could come up with structures, but there's no easy fix. What we need more teams. We need, as I said last week, we need more funding for these teams who are trying their best to come up and challenge the top teams. In my opinion, it's no fault of the top teams. What can they do only beat what's put in front of them, and whether if that, amounts to certain teams getting hammered every now and then, that's just the nature of the format we have. So I don't think it's for us to kind of structure it. I just think it's on a grander scale, it's for the GA to look at and see, can they push the games further in these counties,
Yeah, because Paul, if we're looking for a second, the alternative really here would probably be a Division One proper with, say, 8 teams or 6 teams in it, and then change 1B into a Division 2, maybe a mix of the top teams from 2A right now and the lower teams in, say, Division 1B currently, and make that into a second flight. but you probably end up with the same problem further down the line, as we saw a few years ago, where I think, in fairness, 1B at the time James is speaking about, when I remember Limerick and Galway both coming out of that Division 1 year, and I think Limerick won the league out of it 1 year out of 1B. There was a feeling among the very top teams who were in the old 1A that 1B was like a soft route into a league final at the time.
Yeah, this is it. It's like trying to figure out the system, and probably nearly every sport, a lot of sports have this problem of trying to find where your top teams, and there's a small bit of a gap between, I'm not going to call it like the lower teams or whatever you want to call it. There's always going to be a catch point or a choke point there where, you're trying to introduce a team into the top tier, but trying not to give them beatings. Like, unfortunately, in some ways, it's just a gauge of where counties are. And Malachy Turk made great points in it. But like James was saying, there is a bit of a reality about this, in that when you're trying to fine-tune these things, your few teams are going to take beatings along the way, but it's a very hard thing to try and get right. If you look at the likes of the Joe McDonagh and the Christy Rings, like something that hurling introduced over the years and the GAA introduced, it's been very beneficial. But by no means at the start of that was it a perfect thing. Teams were finding their feet, but once teams got kind of seasons under their belt, they started to improve and they started to go through the grades, and they weren't taking hammerings. They were now within teams of their own standing, and they were winning matches, and it was very rewarding. But then when teams just, you win, you're now stepping out of that pond and you're going into the bigger pond, and suddenly, you have a yard less and the ball is traveling a bit faster and teams are more physical, and now you're taking beatings again. Unfortunately, as far as I'm concerned, that's kind of part of the transition of it. And like you said, Limerick won it a few years ago, coming from 1B, and at that time, I suppose when teams were really going hard to win the league, that was seen as a kind of an easy route, in that you could blood a few players, get a really good, I suppose, few matches, still win your matches, and then start to, I suppose, introduce your one or two players coming closer to a league final. You're a little bit fresher and you hit the ground running. And I think 2 or 3 years maybe, the finalists came from the 1B, just because of the way it was working. But now you see the way it's going, teams are more concerned about, I only have 2 weeks off. If now I get to a league final, I have only 2 weeks off. So now the focus has changed as to what's the problem. The problem now is that we actually have less time going towards a championship. So now the championship being brought closer to the league is suddenly a problem. So I think we'll be fighting for a long time before we figure out exactly, if you get to a stage where you have every team and there's no team taking a beating, and every team is out to win the league, and there's the perfect time between league and championship, happy days. But I don't think there's ever been a period of the GAA where they went, that's perfect. We're always tweaking it. We're always going at it. So look, Malachy made great points in it. But like James was saying, some of it is kind of a reality as well. It just, teams have to improve, counties have to improve. And at the same time, the likes of Antrim, bet Clare, bet Wexford last year, and we're all saying, look, this is brilliant. It's working. The system is working. But then you see teams taking a beat and you go, the system isn't working. There's different results going on that are giving us different kind of positives and negatives. And it's just a hard thing to try and nail down to what's right and what's wrong. But I don't think we're a million miles off it at the moment, to be honest.
And look, in fairness, there's no guarantee if a team has a good run. It's not that long ago, towards the end of both of your playing careers, people were giving Carlow a pat on the back, and Carlow drew against Galway, and the feeling was that maybe Carlow were closing the gap. Now Carlow are definitely going to have another year in Division 2A after their draw at the weekend, and they're trying to get up to a level in the Joe McDonagh where they haven't been able to get over the line to get back into the senior championship. And next thing, it becomes 2-3 years where you're away from the top flight and you're not hurling against the best counties, and your level can naturally come down a bit. Similarly, for all the praise that we've given Antrim for the way they've played, and I think rightly so, with some narrow defeats they've had in the league, the reality is they're now facing a relegation playoff. They're not necessarily going to win the Joe McDonagh and get back to senior level this year either. And for all the plaudits who might give Antrim over the last 18 months, 2 years, they might find themselves in 2023 playing in the second flight in both competitions. So there's no guarantee. Saw Westmeath, this weekend as well, losing out to Down, shock defeat by a couple of points, means almost certainly the Westmeath won't be going back up to Division 1 hurling for next year. So there's no guarantees that these counties who are, say, getting that exposure will necessarily stay there for a long time. And I think, James, that's probably the greatest credit I can give to Laois on this, that Laois have actually, despite a few chastening defeats along the way, have kept themselves at this Division 1 level for a decade now.
Yeah, like if you were to look at the table here, you'd see Laois minus 53. And you'd say, geez, they're getting trimmed in certain games, but they won the game they had to win, And so that's all you can ask of them. And I think Antrim would have gone back up last night, extremely disappointed, yes, with the result, but just overall, if you look at the complexion of the year as it was, I think if Gleeson was starting out his league campaign this year, he probably would have targeted 4 points. he probably would have said, let's get 2 points off Laois, which I thought they would too, and probably sneak 2 points somewhere else, maybe off of Dublin. Maybe might catch someone. And now, as it stands right now, they have 0. And they didn't win the game they were supposed to win. And right now they're faced into a battle against Offaly, presumably Offaly, I think. And it's probably, it sucks the life out of Antrim, if I'm honest. Because there was so much positivity publicly. There was so much, they had gained so much traction over the last 12 months in the previous league game, as Paul touched on, that the public were behind them. And I'd say inside in their own county, people were behind them, trying to get this thing moving a bit faster and a bit harder. And then when this kind of defeat comes along, it just sucks the life. It's like a punch in the gut. You know what I mean? So, but all they can do is put it to bed, get it back up again, and just try and take care of the next game. The relegation playoff, as they say, and that's all they can do, and pack it up and move on to championship. That's all.
Yeah, I think, look, if you're Antrim right now, you got to be thinking this is just a bit of a bump in the road. They beat Offaly in the relegation playoff. They've got Offaly, I think, pretty soon afterwards in the Joe McDonagh as well, who are probably shaping up to be one of their main rivals along with Kerry for that competition. You win those games and you're right back on track for the year. They'll be hoping that they can follow up from this. Just before we go to 1A, I just want to go through the results then from 1B, just to confirm what happened the weekend before, and also at 2A. You've got Waterford winning against Tipperary 128 to 21 points, Kilkenny 223, Dublin 16 points, and Laois with that win by 120 to 119 yesterday in Portlaoise. In Division 2A, Down 1 goal and 18 points, Westmeath 1 goal and 16. Down going great guns in second place going into the final round of fixtures there, where they will play against Kerry, who are on course to qualify for the final after beating Meath by 231 to 14 points, and it was a draw between Kildare and Carlow. We're talking about the league tables. When it comes to Division 2A of the National Hurling League, it creates quite a little quirk going into the final round, because Down have got head-to-head advantage against Westmeath after that victory. Westmeath have got head-to-head over Kerry, having beaten them in the first game. So it actually suits Down to lose against Kerry, because they'll be assured of a place in the final, because Westmeath can't get ahead of them on head-to-head. Very kind of strange scenario. But if Down win, they can make the argument they've got 8 points. Let Kerry and Westmeath worry about who qualifies to play them in a final the week afterwards. Just the way the fixtures have fallen here. So Westmeath need, what Joe Fortune, the manager, said after the game yesterday, pretty much a miracle to try and qualify at this stage. Carlow out of the running because they've only got 3 points in their 4 games so far. And it's Kildare and Meath who are fighting it out to ensure that they're not in the relegation mix for 2B next season. The other thing I noticed as well, lads, we're talking about the rubbishing of the idea of the Ulster team last week and a combined team, whatever. There's probably more of an argument than ever about the fact that there's 2 or 3 competitive teams in Ulster right now, because Derry have got 4 wins from 4 in Division 2B. Derry played in the Christie Ring final last year too. Donegal have won 3 of their 4 games so far. They're both very well placed to qualify for the 2B final. So one of those Ulster counties are likely to go up to 2A. And Down, if they win their next couple of games, could be going up to Division 1 for next season. So while Antrim have been the kind of standout team, Paul, at the same time, it's good to see some of these Ulster teams now making a push, particularly Down in Derry, to get to a level probably not too far behind Antrim again.
Yeah, it'd be huge scouts for them to get up to Division 1. And, when we're talking in the same breath of, teams going up and maybe taking a beating and different things, if you ask any of the down players now, would you like to go up and hurl against, Waterfords and Kilkennys and Galways and Tipperary? Would you like to go up towards Division 1? They'll take your hand off, because that in itself is a reflection of where they are, that they're hurling against some of the best teams. And it's not because they suddenly just turned it on for this year. There's huge work going on across Ulster in general in hurling, and there is pockets, there's Schlockneils and these that are just, putting in savage work, and you guarantee that there'd be nearly a carnival atmosphere if they were in Division 1 and they were going travelling to Nolan Park, or they were going to Walsh Park or wherever, and you'd see the following they'd get. And I think it's their just reward. Let's say they were to get it, or any of the Ulster teams were to come up, like, they'd bring a huge element of pride that they earned their way back up into Division 1. And look, again, for the negatives we say with some of the aspects of these fixtures, there's a positive for you there now. And like you said, Derry and Donegal and the likes of these doing well as well, and showing really good performances as well. So look, there's great performances there. Like you said, they're talking of one team in Ulster, people suggesting this. There's your argument for not doing it, because these teams want to stand alone in their own right, and the clubs up there are very proud. And look, there's proof is in the pudding there that the work was paying off.
Yeah, the 1B table then, as we get ready for the final round of fixtures in a couple of weeks' time, still very much in the mix in Division 1B. So Waterford top with 7 points from their 4 games. They played Kilkenny, their neighbours and rivals in the last game. Kilkenny on 6 points with 3 wins from 4, who are also still very well placed to qualify for the final, particularly as James pointed out before we recorded, because of the really good score difference that Waterford have. Even a draw would be more than enough for them, and even a loss, they're probably still in a very good position to qualify, because Dublin have got 5 points, and even if Dublin beat Laois, they would have to do so quite handsomely and maybe hope that Kilkenny take a few points away from Waterford in order to qualify. Tipperary in the mix as well on 4 points, but that defeat at the weekend for them was a blow in their hopes of qualifying for the last 4. They finish out against an Antrim team who are already preparing for the relegation final. So maybe motivations will come into it a little bit into the last weekend. But James, you would think with the way that 1B is shaping up ahead of that final round, Waterford look good to qualify, and it's probably going to be Kilkenny or Dublin that follow them into the semi-finals.
Yeah, like you would think that Dublin would come through Laois. Now, you'd imagine that Dublin would come through Laois, which would put them onto 7 points as well, which would then mean that obviously Kilkenny have to take at least a draw to qualify. But it looks like right now, it looks like the way the form is, you would say it's going to be Dublin and Waterford qualifying. You know what I mean? Even though Kilkenny have gone fierce well, but it's just the way the table is transpired. You know what I mean? Like Dublin will be on 7. Let's be frank about it. And Waterford and Kilkenny, who knows how that's going to go? You know. So it was an interesting group. But I think across the board, Tipperary are going to be extremely disappointed. Like the way that their league has, you'd imagine there's a pep in the step under a new management team. You'd imagine there was some younger players that should get probably better results. And like I'm looking at them and thinking, geez, they've only scored an average of 14 points from playing all their games. You know what I mean? If we're looking at a Munster Championship, you know, the average amount of points scored by a Munster winning team last year was 30 points. You know what I mean? Every game. So like they're a long way off it. Like nearly 40% of their scores come from dead balls. So they have a lot to do. They have a lot to do in order to catch up with the Munster pack. So the league for them is over, obviously. So now it's turned behind championship. So I think they have a lot of structures, things to fix internally. So
yeah, Division 1, we already spoke kind of top of the pod about the draw, Clare and Limerick, 18 points apiece. So Limerick know what they have to do in the final round. 1:45 Sunday week. They play against Offaly. They avoid defeat. They don't have to go to the relegation playoff, and it will be Offaly against Antrim. But we know already at this stage, Paul, the 2 semi-finalists from 1A, and 2 teams are going to meet in the last round. That'll be proper shadow boxing, you would think, between Cork and Wexford, given that they know they're already into a semi-final. But Cork winners against Galway on Saturday night at Páirc Uí Chaoimh, 126 to 23 points. Difficult circumstances for Galway, particularly given Henry Shefflin's brother Paul passing away on Friday. So that was awkward for their preparations going into the game. But Cork winning quite handsomely on the field, Paul. They've backed up everything we were saying about them so far. Again, I think there's loads of options for scores in that Cork forward line. They showed hunger to turn over the ball, which led to the goal, which is scored by Patrick Horgan, who was very good on the night again. Cork look in a really good place as we get ready for the knockout stages of the league.
They do, yeah. And like they said, they're still building on what we're talking about. All the good things they're doing, they've kept it up. Like again, Galway have been putting in good performances, but like if you want a team to be really threatening come Munster or come around the All-Ireland, there's some matches that you kind of have to turn up in. And the likes of this, you know, you're playing a team on your own patch in Páirc Uí Chaoimh. You're hoping if a team is serious about it, they'll go out and win, and they won very, very handsomely in it. I suppose a few of the things that we'll be looking back on again is a small bit of, you know, Galway were a little bit flat, not to take James's phrase on it there, but they seemed a little bit flat. The likes of Tommy Monaghan turned up brilliantly, and he was one player, I suppose, that really showed hard work rate, chasing lads around, getting the ball, getting back up the pitch, getting his few scores. The distribution into Conor Whelan, we were talking about last week, how they missed him the week before, and you know, how much of a great ball winner he is. They just didn't seem to give him the right ball. They were nearly making him work too hard. When you look down the other end, the Cork forwards didn't necessarily have to work as hard because, okay, they were working hard, but the ball that was coming in was really good ball. When the score wasn't on, they were able to recycle it. And just, again, it goes back to decision making. Their decision making was really good, but at the end, like, there wasn't a huge amount in it either. You know, Galway hit a lot of wides, and particularly Cathal Mannion drifted out the field a little bit there in the second half, and he hit two bad wides, and it kind of summed up Galway's performance. Like, Cork were taking these, like Mark Coleman came up and got a great point. I think just after Cathal Mannion hit one of those wide, similar position for Mark Coleman, he puts the ball over the bar. There was a few small things in it, but it just seemed to be the clinicalness of Cork, that they were taking their scores. They seemed to be showing really well. Like you said, Patrick Horgan looked dangerous and they were threatening the whole time. But as well, one thing I did notice about Galway, and it's just a small thing because they look like they're just about in terms of intensity. You know, about 10% off is all it is. But you saw they were working the ball out, and one of the balls they were working out, Cork player dispossessed it, but there was no Galway player following in straight away after to get on the ball. And, you know, things we're talking that Waterford were doing or that Clare were even doing against Limerick. It just seemed to be a small bit. Now, I wouldn't see it as a huge thing at all. It's just a matter of, you know, the likes of Henry and the lads will be looking at this going, lads, we dropped off it, and all it takes is 2 or 3% or 5%. That's all it takes. If we're really serious with this, you know, the work rate has to be right up there. The attitude has to be up there. And there were small things just around the park for Galway that I just thought that just lacked their intensity and a bit of decisiveness. But again, Cork can only play what was in front of them. They had a great performance and wrapped up 126 great scoring as well. So look, great performance out of Cork.
James, talk to us about those few percentages that are maybe missing then, because you thought the performance was a little bit flat against Wexford as well last week. Yeah,
but again, like I know we've been beaten by 6 points 2 weeks in a row, but I was more encouraged after the Cork game, would you believe? Because being at the Wexford game, I thought we were extremely lethargic and we had no real plan. You know what I mean? At least against Cork, we shot about 17 points from play, which was nowhere near as in Wexford. So that was very, very encouraging. Like, and we got points from play off players that we wouldn't necessarily expected. I think of Ronan Glennon and Tom Mannon, I believe, got 9 points between them. You know, just popping up, taking scores, and that's what you need. Two young guys who wouldn't necessarily be associated with the Galway seniors of the last couple of years, obviously. So that was encouraging. I absolutely pick up on Paul's point where he said that there was moments of the game where we were lethargic, really lethargic. You know, like Paul is right. Work rate for me is not a skill, like it's just a decision. You know, so you know, it's like what he said about attitude. Like you choose to go out and you work your absolute socks off. You know, and that sometimes that didn't happen. And there were some elements of the game that like it's kind of it was very lazy, small bit lazy. When you think of the goal that we conceded, like that was kind of a lazy type clearance where the ball hit the ground and the Park should have got rid of it. Like just bring man, ball, everything, get it out. But it was kind of a one-handed swing trying to get it out, and Hoggy picks it up when it's in the net. And Paul, I'll tell you, margins at intercounty level at this height are so small. So one little error or one little mental error or lack of concentration, you could be raising the green flag against you. You know what I mean? So that's one element of concern. The second element of concern for me is probably an element of adaptability. You know, so Cork's game plan, you could just see it was a possession game, and they were trying to. The two best players for me for Cork was Coleman and Barrett, 6 and 11. You know, and everything seemed to come through those. And we couldn't adapt to the Cork puck out, whereby Cork had a 3-2-3 formation in their puck out. We couldn't get to it. You know, we couldn't figure it out. You know what I mean? And then Barrett found himself in space. I have enough fingers and toes to count the amount of times he found himself in space, and he just created an awful lot. So I was probably disappointed with the lack of attention the Galway backs gave the Cork forwards, you want to call it that. You know, and I think there's loads of works on. There's loads of positives. Like it's not all doom and gloom. You know what I mean? I thought Éanna Murphy was brilliant in the goals. You know, he was fantastic, and I thought Dahi was good for most portions. Like and so at least, you know, there's great positives to take out of it from certain individual bases. And if you can piece all this together, we'll have a good, hopefully have a good run. But look, on the outside, you'd say 2 games, 6 points get beaten. God, it's all doom and gloom. But not for me. I think we're still okay in the sense that there's minor building blocks in every day we go out that you can pick positives that if you piece it all together, you get the sum of all parts, which hopefully would be good enough come championship.
James, both of you mentioned Coleman here and how well he played for Cork at the weekend. And we've spoken about Fitzgibbon, who's been brilliant around the middle of the field. But when it comes to Coleman at 6, right, that was a problem area in the All-Ireland final for Cork last year, where Limerick's half-forward line really got on top. Is Coleman now looking the right number 6 for Cork as we come through the league and have a look at him playing this position quite a bit this year?
Yeah, I think so. And even when the camera zoomed in on, he looked very vocal. You could see him kind of marshalling the lads around him, let's say. And I suppose in games or years previous, you probably look at him as being more of a hurler than I suppose a captain type person who's fixing things around him. And that's vital for me as a number 6. I think that's a fundamental. If you're going to be a number 6, you have to be a good player, a good hurler, but you need to be a really good organizer. You know, you need to be nearly as vocal as the goalkeeper is to fix things around you, because the more you set things around you with your halfbacks or midfield and you create structure, the better it is for your defence and the easier it is for your defence behind you. You know, you want to limit the amount of pandemonium that happens there. And that's why I've been impressed with Mark Coleman. He seems to be always very vocal and he's organising things around him. So that's great. And then when you see him going forward, man, he's unreal at the link play. So like he when he's running, he looks like he's gliding. So he's going through up and all of his scores are coming through the middle, you know. So he's getting out of danger, he's getting out of tackles, he's breaking through, and he's popping up for a whole range of scores. So he's definitely the answer to number 6 and like a great player, and he's only going to get better. It's not like he's 29, 30 years of age. He's on the way down. He's on the ascendancy.
Yeah, because Paul, this has become really the thing for any hurling team who wants to play a possession-based game right now. You need a number 6 who's able to mark and who's able to, as James says, organise things around them as well. And in his case, he's the captain for Cork this year, but also on the front foot. And we see this with Declan Hannon's distribution and other players who play in possession-based teams at number 6 as well. It's very important that they're actually good with the ball and not just putting a long diagonal into the forward line.
Yeah, absolutely. And something that we'd never be, I suppose, criticising Mark Oman for his distribution. He's probably one of the most skillful and thoughtful players in terms of how he uses the ball. But like even in the All-Ireland last year, like when I seen how he played the game from centre back, to be honest, I wouldn't be hard on Mark Oman in that position. I even think that's more of a thing from the line. One of the hardest things in the game at the moment is the centre back, and basically asking the question, do I stay or do I go? That's the one question you're going to hear from your centre back. And the likes of that's why Tony Kelly causes a problem. Tony Kelly runs wherever he wants. And the question for the centre back is, do I stay or do I go? And regardless of how good the centre back is, you're now asking the centre back to go and hurl because he has to be clever enough to mark the likes of Tony Kelly or the likes of Stephen Bennett, who wants to roam and go different places. And we're saying the same thing about Rory O'Connor against Wexford. When you're giving a lad license to roam, has to ask the question of the centre back, do I stay or do I go? And I don't think the line, and not to be hard on Kieran Kingston or anyone, gave Mark Coleman that answer going out against Cian Lynch, the All-Ireland last year. I think Mark Coleman will hurl against any player and give him a good battle, regardless who it is. But you need to give him the information. Like it's too late when he's on the pitch to go, this is the way you should be playing. It seemed, in fairness, in the All-Ireland last year, all the Cork backs were kind of a little bit unsure as to what their plan was. But for Mark Coleman to thrive in that position, I've no doubt he'll thrive as a captain. But if you just have to give him the information, tell him, listen, you're centre back, and in this situation, let's say if Cian Lynch goes out, you follow him. Or if Cian Lynch goes out, it's up to the midfielders to come in and get him, and that's the midfielder's job. So Mark Coleman now knows that, okay, now I can go and hurl because I know what's expected of me from the position. So I wouldn't be so hard in terms of the final last year. I just think Kieran Kingston has looked at him now and go, he's great material for a captain. He has all the hurling in the world. As James said, he's getting better, and we know he's only going to get better. We just need to give him the information to allow him to dominate in that role, and also feed the information to the boys around him. Like the midfielders, with the way the game is now, have to give him cover so that he can go and hurl, and then distribute it, like we say, this quarterback, kind of get the ball and be able to decide the way the game is going to go. So that for me is the big thing with Mark Coleman, is the sideline need to tell him, this is what you do in any situation. Don't leave him on the pitch with the situation of, do I stay or do I go? Because every centre-back is asking that question at the moment.
Paul, you mentioned Tony Kelly, just to kind of talk about Clare, because we focused understandably, I think, on Limerick and some of the concerns that they might have. Clare probably be happy enough now at this stage with what's happened over the last couple of games. Shook Offaly off after being in the game for about 50 minutes, and Clare then finished strongly in the last 20. Probably should have won against Limerick over the balance of play at the weekend as well. And now they get a cut at Galway to get ready for Munster Championship. They're going to have a little bit of a break. They'll be hoping that some of their injuries clear up as well. Clare, I think, would be happy enough to have registered 3 points over the last couple of games, Paul.
Yeah, absolutely. If you were to give Clare their results over, let's say, the period of the league, and if you were to set them out, would you rather these results to happen at the start of your league or at the end of the league? They'll tell you at the end of the league coming towards Championship, because if they put in a good performance, let's say they played Limerick in the first round and they drew with them, they put in the performance they did yesterday, that would be a distant memory now, whereas we're coming closer to Championship. And if Antrim, they're answering a few questions, like we knew when Tony Kelly would come back, what Tony Kelly kind of does, not only does he get the scores and he gets on ball and he drives the team forward, it's that thing of he occupies the other defence, because they're so worried about what is Tony Kelly doing, that the rest of the lads can kind of go and hurl. And I think that's what he does. He frees lads up around him. But they went at Limerick yesterday, and I think something they'll take away from the weekend and going forward is that, like, they went toe to toe with Limerick, no problem. I mean, okay, they weren't physically the bigger team by any means, but like, so Davy Fitzgerald stepped up and had a great game. Again, of course, like Tony Kelly stepped up, but all over the pitch they were denying a good goal as well, which from what I could see, not to be hard on the refs again for another week, but they were denying a goal. If that goal went in, where does that lead? We're talking about, these things that tip the scales. I think if that goal goes in, Limerick or Clare might kick on a small bit again. So it would have been interesting, but even still, they reset after that. They didn't get the goal to reset. They just stuck to their task. They could have won the game, but also Limerick could have won it. Dermot Burns got a ball, could have put it over the bar. But I think just Clare had those few extra chances. Even Tony Kelly himself had a chance to win the game. But definitely Clare will come away from it going, brilliant. We're headed in the right direction here. And like we said, going back to the same things that Brian Nolan will be looking for is they went out and they worked hard and they hit Limerick. Like, it's one thing to go and train and then before the match say, lads, hit these lads hard and say all these kind of things that are all nice to hear. But they actually went out and they did it. And they worked really hard. They got up in Limerick's face and they'll come away from it going, well, if that's what the All-Ireland champions are, and we know Limerick have another few years to go through, but Clare can only play what's in front of them. And they went out, they went against them, got a draw, would feel hard done by not having a win. I think they're happy coming away from yesterday, but they're looking to build on that again, because that performance yesterday, as good as it was, you still need to go and get past the 20-point mark in championship. You need to get a goal. You need to there's a few other things you need to take to be a really threatening team, but they'll be happy they're headed in the right direction anyway.
Yeah. Saturday afternoon, then, we had Wexford become the first team to formally book their place in the last 4 of Division One, the league this year. 111 for Rory O'Connor. Saw someone put up a meme afterwards, Rory O'Connor is God, was the sign that they had up after the game with the way that he's playing currently. There's some really good foreign players in the league that we've seen. Park Walsh, Rory himself, who've been really showing well, and Rory missed the first game with injury but then came back flying. In the end, Wexford won by 122 to 2 goals and 12 points. Michael Fennelly said to me after the game, I had tweeted to say, good to see Offaly in both games against Clare and Wexford 50 minutes. He said 60 minutes today was how close they'd run it, but Wexford finished out the game strongly to win. Did you see the goal, James? I think Buff Egan was probably the best place to see this on Saturday. He had it up on the social media, the Rory O'Connor goal, where he survived almost being decapitated 3 times on his slaloming run, but somehow he managed to have the twinkle toes to get himself into a position and finish to the net. I know we spoke about his form last week, but like, what a ridiculous goal.
Yeah. I trust me now, I'm not going to lie with it, I didn't see the goal, but like,
you need to see it. I'll send it on to you.
I can just picture Offaly lads hanging out from now.
Yep.
It was a similar position that Paddy Purcell kind of came in from, except they're, like you said, Will, they were just trying to decapitate Rory O'Connor going through. And in fairness to him, it just showed the physical strength of him, that like, he's probably not one of the bigger players, but the fact that he drove through and hung up the ball and off he went, there was a bit of aggression to it. But
don't love it though. But like, if you're at the back, right, and you've got a forward up there, let's say, who's willing to take that bit of punishment and go for it, isn't that great? Like, how many times have we seen forwards in games whereby you think they're through on goal and you're saying, go for it, and they tap it over. You know, so if you've got someone of the caliber of Rory O'Connor who's willing to take on a bit of heat, you know, and stick it in the net, God, that's so invaluable. Like, it's so invaluable. You know, it's like if there was a transfer market right now, like, he's in the top. Honestly, with the form he's in, he's in top 5. You know, right now he is,
yeah. I still think Keane Lynch is the best hurler in the country. There was a couple of people kind of arguing this at the weekend after the game on Twitter. Like, I still think if you take everything into account and he's coming back to form in intercounty and so on, he's still the best. But you can't take away from the fact that, you know, Rory O'Connor's scoring in the last couple of games has carried Wexford to some big wins, which has got them to a league semi-final. And like, the goal as well, James, you're talking about the lift and what it does when a player can go on an individual run like that. It was at a time when Offaly were actually on top in the match, and then O'Connor gets the goal and it swung it back coming towards half time. And again, he just kept on popping over the scores in the second half, which got Wexford over the line. And I would think, James, that at this stage, new manager coming in, Darragh Egan, bit of a change around in system, Wexford would be very pleased to know that with a game to spare, doesn't really matter what happens against Cork in the last game, that they're going to a league semi-final here.
Of course, I think if, like I said, if they looked at their league group at the start of the year, and they'd seen, you know, Galway and they'd seen Limerick, and they may not have expected to come out of the league when you consider they have a new manager in place. So think of the league collectively. I know we can, us as kind of pundits, we can harp on individual results and we can, you know, talk what we talk, but collectively all the way across the league, Wexford have been impressive. They've gone about their business. They've won all their games. You know what I mean? They're undefeated as we said. They're not conceding a lot, which is huge, because like, with Wexford, you probably could have said about them in the past that you can get at them and rack up a big score and they won't score much against you. But they seem to have tightened up the defence a bit now with a few, you know, position changes and Paddy Foley, etc., doing really well, and Matthew Hanlon. So they've got the makings of a good championship run. You know, it looks like they can probably put something together. I'd be very interested how they see they get on in the league semi-final now, because yes, the group they come through and they've got a bit of traction. But when you come to a knockout game now, how will they perform? So I'm looking forward to seeing how that transpires. But again, overall, if you're rating the league campaign so far, 10 out of 10.
Yeah, depends what happens, Paul. But we could well get Kilkenny against Wexford again, which was very entertaining in Championship last year. Depending on what happens with Dublin, maybe we get Wexford in Dublin, and we'll see how different Wexford are compared to the trip to Croke Park for the Walsh Cup final versus maybe where they're at now. We'll get maybe some answers to where Wexford are at after that semi-final. But it's an interesting point that James raises there, Paul, about the defence, because we've spoken so much about how Wexford have maybe liberated some of their forwards during this league campaign. But at the same time, they're the lowest conceding team across the Division 1 and 1B this year.
Yeah, that's an enormous thing to be able to say for any team, that, you know, going forward, it's all great going forward if you're racking up the scores, but if you're letting them in handy down the far end, you know, you're just cutting off your nose to spite your face. And it is something that's been really impressive with Wexford. And like they've changed it around as well. You know, they haven't just stuck to the one format. Like we saw Matthew Hanlon in the first game, he was corner back, and I thought, this is it now for Matthew Hanlon, he's going to be in corner back. Next game he was out wing back. I was kind of saying, well, maybe in fairness, like Darragh Egan is not nailing down exactly, like just because a player goes well one day, maybe we'll move it around, and he's not afraid to upset it a small bit that way and ask a few questions of players. But they're hurling really well. And the main thing is, I suppose, going backwards, is they're flooding backwards in their defence. They're all kind of chasing back, and they're looking to get that little flick and dispossess. Once they get that, then they're suddenly turning around and they're building back up the pitch again. It just seems to be a cycle that they have of, right, we've lost the ball, everyone's flooding back. But it's not brainless either. It's not completely like we all flood back brainlessly. And now that we have the ball turned over, we now have no one else up the pitch. They have a great system in place. Each player knows who's getting back. They're running back, and no ball is given up on. Like, they're chasing back. I might get a flick. I might just even put off a player. But the way they're flooding back, it's so aggressive at the moment. And like you said there, like, to be the lowest conceding team, that's a huge thing for defence, to be able to say that, look, we're doing our part. And the whole thing of forwards win matches, but defenders win championships. The defence for Wexford now can stand tall and say, look, we've played against the best team so far, or most of the best teams anyway, and we're the lowest conceding. We're doing something right in terms of our man-to-man matchups and the system that we're playing. So it's a big feather in the cap for Wexford to be able to say that at this stage.
Yeah, before we finish, great chance to have a look at the YouTube comments over the last week or so, because next week we'll definitely be taking a big look at your comments coming into us on @OffTheBall on Twitter, or if you're leaving comments under the YouTube, if you're watching the premiere of this on Tuesday afternoon, as opposed to listening to the audio pod on a Monday evening. John Farrell was in contact on pod number 1. Great to get a hurling pod, great contributors. One thing is, bit of production, such as music and what's on today's show. Keep up the good work, lads. Added this in this week, so you're now getting the audio intro. I've took a few pictures on it. It's not the ultimate production value, but hopefully it's better to have that rather than the cold open that we've had over the last couple of weeks, where we pretty much use the video part where we come in from the start. Mentioned Kieran 32 earlier, saying different Limerick come April. The only concern, James, if you're Kieran at this stage saying that, is that Limerick just haven't shown it so far. And it's not necessarily like flicking a switch here. I remember last year, and I don't mean to directly compare them, but we were saying this about Dublin in the football in July, even after the Leinster final. They weren't convincing against Kildare, and everyone just kind of went, Dublin will come good. It just has to happen. It doesn't necessarily happen that a team gets back to the level they were at.
No, because every other team is improving. You know, so when you look at Limerick, you would have said, right, they were stronger, they were more efficient with the ball, they were better tactically, they probably had the best coach in the country. You look at all that, and you try to strip that back, and everyone's trying to chase. So now everyone is going to be the same strength. Everyone's going to have the same. You'd imagine everyone has the same fitness. Even Waterford are getting fitter, you could say. And everyone is learning the possession game, because Limerick did it first. You know, well, Cork did it first, obviously years and years ago. But in the most modern game, let's say, mixing between power and pace and ball retention, Limerick did it first. And like Cork last year, they started off that process and got into it as the year went on. Now they've graduated on to the next step, and every other team is doing it as well. So the gap is closing. And I fundamentally, I completely disagree with the notion that Limerick can just flick a switch. Like, Paul, you know, we've been in teams long enough, right? You can feel it. You can feel it in the group. If we're not going well, you know, we're not going to play well. So, like, if we're not preparing well in training and we're not playing good training games, and, you know, let's say the A team are beating the lard out the B team, it's a really, really bad dynamic inside in the group, and that doesn't transpire to good results of the pitch. It all has to come together. That's a fact. Any winning player who's been on, or any player who's been on a winning team will tell you that everything comes together. It's the sum of all the parts. You know, everyone together. That's 35 or 6 players, the management, the logistics. You know, the bus driver, everyone. It all comes together, and then you perform on the pitch. And right now, it looks from the outside looking in that it's just a bit disjointed, somewhat. You know, and when you mix in the disciplinary issues and all the media coverage that's getting, it's just they're not in the place they want to be. And for someone to tell me that they'll flick a switch come April and we're going to walk through Ireland, I think they're just ludicrous. Definitely. I don't know what Paul thinks now, but I'd say similar lines, I'd imagine.
No, I agree with you. Like, again, you're always reflecting on your own kind of experiences with all this. And the one thing I was kind of looking at with Limerick and thinking about any experience I would have had that was similar, my own career would have been 2013. Like, we came back off the back of the All-Ireland in 2012. We still had majority of players. We had very little retirements. And we went into that, and Dublin caught us on the hop in Portlaoise. We went to a draw match. The following week, Dublin bet us in Portlaoise, and then we were facing into a qualifiers where matches were coming week on week, and we're having to address the problems without really fully training, which is a problem. You know, you want to get out into the pitch and you want to be able to test your mental against each other, and we weren't able to do that. So the only way that we were actually trying to answer the questions was on the pitch. And you know, Dublin bet us. The following week we had to go and play Tip in the Park, and great match. We won it, but it was kind of ride or over. It was back to the wall stuff, and it was a brilliant performance. But we had, I think it was the following week or maybe 2 weeks later, we played Cork down in Thurles. And the thing about it is, you might say that a week or 2 weeks is enough time. Like, people say, oh, they got out of jail today, they'll be right the next day. But like you said, James, you don't just turn it on. Usually there's a few things that are underlying there that it takes a few weeks to address it. But if you're not getting a few weeks between games, you're going from game to game, hoping that you correct one thing at a time. And that's, I think, what we're kind of saying about Limerick is that, okay, they have the few things like the disciplinary, and they're not working harder than other teams. Closer it gets to championship, the less time they have to start rectifying that. If they show this at the start of the league and then they gradually start to correct it, we'd be going, the indicators are here, they're starting to come back. They just haven't shown it to us yet. And like we said, none of us here are saying that they won't get it right. Like you said, Will, like, they just haven't shown it to us yet that they're going to correct it. So you're dead right, James. You won't turn it on overnight. It'll take a few weeks, but each week that you don't turn it on, it's a week closer to championship. And once you get into championship, or round robin, call it what you want. Round robin sounds a nice way. It's championship. It's harder to correct it then. And the biggest thing about that, I would say, is that other teams smell that then. They smell blood. And, you know, if you're not showing it outwardly, you might even beat a team before the game starts. But if the other team kind of thinks that, we go out here, lads, we're in with a chance here today, that feeds into their energy in the game. And it can be a tough place when you're going out week on week facing teams that smell blood, you know. So that's where I think, that's what I think we all think the issues are with Limerick at the moment.
We'll talk about, again, we've talked about Cork a lot, but there was quite a few messages last week about Cork on the back of their win against Limerick, including Patrick Coleman. Did the beating in the All-Ireland final last year maybe make a new monster in Cork? They look like All-Ireland contenders at this stage. And also Cookman, who was wondering was a misspelling for Corkman when I read his comment, said, agrees, something different about Cork for sure. Very impressive on Sunday. That was the game against Limerick. But don't write Limerick off. For me, Cork are certain contenders this year. We can put that to both of you, lads. From what we've seen so far, James, do Cork look like a team who, when we get to, I'm so tempted to say the first weekend in September here, but when we get to the second week in July, will we genuinely be looking at Cork being a contender in an All-Ireland final this year?
Yeah, I just, again, we can only assess what's put in front of us at the minute. And Cork have scored 9 goals and 100 points in the league so far out of 4 games. So they're shooting the lights out. And that's 962 from play. That's massive scoring, do you know what I mean? So everything is pointing to the fact that they're ready to put a run together. And I think last year's experiences by getting through a very tight game against Kilkenny and obviously having the experience of the final against Limerick will stand to them. I know it's a cliche, or it'll stand to them. It 100% will stand to them, because that feeling of hurt, you know, of all the efforts that went in throughout the year, and that feeling of hurt and going to go up against Limerick. And I guarantee you the Cork lads, they begrudge Limerick a bit. There's a hint of jealousy for what they've achieved, and they want that. They want that because, again, we go back to any winning team will tell you, the best moment of any season is that 5 minutes after you win a game. Or if you're looking after in Ireland, it's that 5-10 minutes of just pure euphoria, and you're always chasing that. So for any team who hasn't got it, you would do anything to go get it. And I'm looking at Cork this year, and I have it in my head that they trained all winter. They were lifting weights all winter. They were planning all this all along, let's say, and it's pure Corkness now, and the Red Sea is coming, and that's what I'm looking at now. I'm thinking, geez, they look like that, you know. The players that they've blooded in, as well as the guys who've been there for the last number of years, look like they're all going in one direction. And like, again, what we're saying a moment ago about Limerick being a bit disjointed, it's the opposite for Cork. They look very jointed, you know. So I think I was going to say the second Sunday in September myself, or the first one, come the end of July or whenever it is, right? I think you'll be seeing Cork, Waterford and Limerick just straight away, like having three months of teams. That's where I'm pointing towards.
Ooh, right. That puts our Leinster Championship debate maybe for next weekend onto one side if James reckons it's going to be a Munster fest when we get to the semi-finals. What do you reckon, Paul? I mean, you've spoken about Cork there a bit already, but later in the year, will this Cork style and everything we've been impressed by so far in the league, will that translate to them being a very hard team to beat in the Liam McCarthy?
It's again still hard to call. Like, I don't know why I have this air of doubt over me just about Cork.
Jury is out here.
The jury is out at the moment, and that's the thing about it. The one thing I will say is, look, you often hear lads saying you have to lose one before you win one in terms of All-Ireland. I don't believe that myself, but certainly losing an All-Ireland final, it'll I suppose get rid of some of the, not to say bad habits or anything, but if they're back in the same situation this year, you can guarantee they'll do a lot of things differently. Yeah. And a lot of those players who experienced it will go, Jesus, where was my head at before that final, or whatever. It's an opportunity missed. You'll have that grief of losing the All-Ireland final, and you're a different player from then on. Once you lose an All-Ireland final, you're a completely different player. So that is one thing that will be in their benefit this year. Like, I mean, it's not, you couldn't have told them that the day after the All-Ireland final that, look, bringing this into next year will be a benefit. It will be for them. And you'd like to think that Cork, if they're in the same position now this year in July, that they would be a different team and they won't let that chance go as they did last year. I just still think the jury's out at the moment. They're putting in fantastic performances and brilliant stuff. But again, it's still the league. It's not to dismiss the league. It's the league. You come to championship, and I think you'll see a few different characters change in teams, and there'll be a bit more cut to them. And the one question I'd have of Cork is that if they do string together a few good wins in the championship, will the feet stay on the ground, and will the heads stay tuned, and will they stay as hungry, or will the crowd get in their ears saying you're great lads? Will that get to them? That's not to be critical. That once you're winning, blocking out the people saying you're a great lad is one of the first things you should be doing. That's a question I still think the Cork lads have to answer, and that's not to slight them in any way. But I just think if they start heading in the right direction to keep this form going, are they in danger of leaving themselves wide open for a clattering in one of the games? That's my question about them. And again, that's not to criticise them in any way. They're performing brilliantly and they've answered a lot of the critics so far. But I do still think the jury is out at the moment, if I'm to be very critical about it.
Right. I get to be the intermediary here. It's Corkness versus complacency is the argument that we have going into championship in 5 weeks' time now. This is going to come around very, very quickly indeed. A lot of questions about the rules, because we were talking about the hand pass being clamped down on last week. My plan as things stand ahead of next week is we'll try and get a intercounty referee or maybe a former intercounty referee on next week, because On Brew was one of the comments on the YouTube premiere last week, raised a lot of points around the hurling rules and how they're applied. And I'd say probably a lot of people saw the picture which was taken at the weekend, which is like 4 sequences of a picture by James Crombie, which is Cian Lynch and John Conlon tangling. And you see Cian Lynch's hand coming around. Maybe it says a lot about his conditioning that he breaks John Conlon's hurl in half with effectively a wrestling-style clothesline, which technically should have been called up as a foul, but it happened so quickly. And just the nature of players now going into effectively, James, what are like contact situations. You're wearing a rugby top at the moment, so it probably seems the right time to ask about this, that, players are now running into each other. A lot of the circumstances where these flicks and throws for hand passes are happening, players didn't kind of run into each other as much 10 or 15 years ago as they do right now.
Yeah, they didn't. First of all, I don't think players were anywhere near as conditioned as players are right now. And I think the way the coaching has developed over the last number of years, you're being coached to use your body in both attack and defence. Because even from a referee perspective, if you put the hurl in at all and it somehow goes around the neck, it's a free straight away. But if you can get your hands out wide and say, don't initiate contact around the neck, obviously get your hands up and use your body as a kind of somewhat of a blockade, it's a fair hit. But what happens with the Cian Lynch incident, and we see it every day, but just the fact that it was captured in a photograph and the result was a broken hurl, that tackle is happening every single day, and it happens so quick that you don't really pass much remarks on it. And is it a fair tackle? No, it's not. It's a free. You know what I mean? If you were to slow it down into a still image, people would argue it's nearly a red card. That's the way people, when you slow these things down and look at them individually, at a much slower speed than the human eye can capture, you think, geez, there's going to be a million fouls in hurling. But I just think the way the condition has evolved over hurling over the last, probably, it started off with Kilkenny, to be honest. I remember looking at Jackie Tyrrell in college and this lad benching 100 kilos. And at the time I was thinking, mother of God, he's an animal. But now that's the norm, for in-country players at the moment. That's just the way it's evolved. And so when you've got a body as massive as that, use it as a tool.
Look at that, Paul. You created a monster in Kilkenny with the kilos of pure muscle that you guys were packing on, and that team who some people felt were a bit too physical. Now the modern hurler is just kind of copying that blueprint. You're at fault here.
Yeah, it's all our fault. Little did Jackie know when he was bench pressing in college that he was going to cause this storm, according to James.
I'll tell you a better one. I remember we were out the night before, which made it even more impressive. So that made it even more impressive.
Yeah, but like James is right. One of the things I was thinking about as well, and like there's no doubt players about like your smaller players, if you want to call it that, even on a GA pitch. Now they're big men. Nearly a rule of thumb is that most players aren't under 75 kg anymore, 80 kg. Certainly not the lads that have been there a few years. They're banging on the muscle, and like you said, well, they're colliding into each other. And I was kind of looking even at the weekend, and because the matches, let's say outside of Croke Park, if you're playing in Ennis or you're playing in Walsh Park or whatever, the pitches are only marginally, let's say 5 metres here or 10 metres, let's say lengthways shorter. But players are covering such ground and players are swarming. There's so little room to actually manoeuvre. And then, of course, the emphasis is on you get the ball, you break the tackle and you pop the ball off. Players are colliding. And another thing we saw the weekend, again, okay, we're saying Keane Lynch tackled John Conlon. Keane Lynch was tackled himself, got a rap in the head. It wasn't, I don't think, deliberate anyway. He was going to raise the ball. Clear lad came in, hit him in the head, and he was down for a minute or two, getting his composure. Barry Heffernan hit Stephen Bennett, a shot down below in the match. Again, no malice in it, but players are moving so fast. And also like that, now to counteract that, other players are so elusive. Like lads are getting the ball and they change direction so quick. If you had your hands out making yourself big, as would be taught nearly day one when you're teaching young folk to hurl, you leave the hands out and suddenly now you're dealing with players who are sprinting past you, ducking past you, sidestepping, and you're handed out, wraps around the head. You maybe run head on into each other. So there is a lot of collisions at the moment. There's also a lot of those tackles that players going to have to be a bit more careful at the moment, that you're not leaving the hand out, because like that, a ball is popped off. You leave your hurl at shoulder height, but the player passing you is, I suppose, driving through and has the head down. Suddenly you wrap around the neck and he's travelling at speed and there's a tackle and it's a red card. The referee will be left in no position to give you a red card. So it is something we're seeing creeping in a bit more, particularly the higher tackles. And I think part of it is down to the physicality of the game. Part of it is down to the speed players are moving and that they're off the shoulder and the change of directions and things. And also part of it is just that players are standing up, trying to stop a lad coming through, 2 and 3 lads swarming them. And we are seeing a lot more. And I don't know, is it something we started? I don't think it is, but if we are, sure, happy days. That's our legacy to the game.
I like to think about the Keane Lynch and Conlon coming together at the weekend. When I look back at the TG Carr stream of the game, it looked to me as if Conlon's hurl had just broken as he hit Lynch. It didn't actually seem like Lynch's arm had come around and broken his hurl. I actually kind of thought maybe there was either hurl on hurl contact or maybe Conlon's hurl had hit Lynch as he was going past. So to James's point, it's amazing when you watch it, even on a video when it's zoomed out a little bit. I don't think there's any way the officials could have seen that it was Keane Lynch's arm that came around and broke the hurl, as opposed to the contact being initiated the other way. It's just the nature of these guys running into each other at high speed. On that point as well, last of our YouTube comments for this week coming in from Sean Claffey, who is commenting on the hand pass rule that we were talking about, and a clear striking action needed to be seen, and maybe that's not been the case over the last couple of years, and now referees have been asked to clamp down on it. The idea, James, that Sean has come up with is change the hand pass rule so you can only hand pass off the hurley, as opposed to being out of the hand and being thrown up in a striking motion. I think the idea of the hand pass coming off the hurley, though, not to guide you in this question, will be that's very difficult with just what we've spoken about now. The amount of times that lads go running into rucks, try and pick up the ball in close quarters, the amount of times that multiple players come into contact with each other when the ball is being run, it'd be very difficult to actually get the ball onto your hurley and do the hand pass off it, given the amount of tight situations we're talking about in the game now. I
think if you're to implement that rule, then the hand pass becomes an impossibility. The hand pass off the hurley is only really ever when you're in full flight and there's someone running beside you. Put it this way, I never hand pass off the hurley. I'm never in full flight and, hand it off to someone. But that's what it is. Like, you're in full flight and you probably have a caught twice and you hand it off. The nature of today's game, and we've covered it over the last couple of weeks, is it's so intense. It's so tackle focused. It's so, getting on the breaks, creating rucks, etc. that the hand pass would virtually be ruled, inadequate if that was the case. I think what's happening over the last couple of weeks with the referee, they're actually doing right. They're forcing, and even you could see it in the second half in the Cork Galway game, would you believe, because it happened probably 3 or 4 times in the first half. You can see players constantly trying to create, a greater striking action so that the referee wouldn't catch them. So I have no problem with what's happening at the moment. I know from from a spectator perspective, it somehow slows down the game. And every decision that was called, even in the Dublin Kilkenny game, there was a big groan from the crowd. Big groan, because they want to see a spectacle. But I think it's right. So I think we should continue with business as usual at the moment, and trust the referees to a certain extent to implement the game, and then the players themselves will have to react and then become proactive and give a greater strike in action. That's how we solve it.
Yeah, we'll chat about the leagues next week. About the rules that have been enforced in the league next week. Promise that, because a few people have brought it up that they want a bit of a discussion around it, and it's obviously a hot topic at the moment, particularly around the hand pass and the way that the tackle has been interpreted in the first 4 rounds of the league. It's a break week next week in terms of fixtures, so we'll be doing a bit of a preview of the final round of regular games, and particularly the way that 1B is shaping up, with still a few teams in contention to reach that semi-final. Limerick should really avoid the relegation final, but we'll talk about that next week as well. Enjoyed your company, James and Paul. Thanks a million, and we'll talk again ahead of the pod next Monday.
Thanks very much, lads.
Will, before I go, if you wouldn't mind,
go on, yeah.
I just want to say one thing, kind of on behalf of myself and our club here. We've a fella at home, Sean Stankert, who's a pillar of our community, and has been fantastic for the club over the last 40 years, going through a very, very tough illness at the moment. I just want to take the opportunity to wish himself and his family well wishes. So, thank you.
Well said, James. Yeah, no, I'm sure if you listen into the pod, that'll be very well received as well, and very well said. Also, I should say on that same note as well, that yesterday on Midlands 103, Jack Nolan, who's been the voice of Laois GA on that station for 32 years, has taken what he's called a retirement, but will be a break with the fighter that he is. Again, he's fighting illness currently and is going for 12 weeks of chemotherapy over the next few months. And we're still hopeful that he'll be able to make somewhat of a comeback in Midlands 103, because he's been calling a lot of those big games, like when James's Galway team beat Laois a few years ago, and Laois almost got out with a victory. Laois's win in 2019 against Dublin, his commentary went viral afterwards. And if it does prove to be his last commentary game, he commentated on Laois staying up in Division One of the Hurling League with that win against Antrim. So all the best to Jack Nolan with his recovery as well. Lads, again, thanks a million, and see you next week.
Thanks, Will.
See you now, Will.